I'm Rufus Griscom, and this is The Next Big Idea. Today, lessons in common knowledge and rationality. The legendary Harvard psychologist Steven Pinker published a new book this week. It's called When Everyone Knows That Everyone Knows. And it's about, well, I'll let Steve tell you.
My latest book is about how people think about what other people think they think.
I know, it sounds like a riddle. Really what the book is about is this process by which we go from private knowledge,
I know something and you know it.
to common knowledge.
I know that fact and you know it, but in addition, I know that you know it, and you know that I know it. On top of that, I know that you know that I know it, and you know that I know that you know it, and so on ad infinitum.
Steve says this shift is the hidden force behind everything from financial bubbles to political protests to why we say Netflix and chill instead of just asking for sex. Common knowledge doesn't just help us coordinate. It shapes our economy, our politics, and our most intimate relationships. In his previous books, The Better Angels of Our Nature and Enlightenment Now, Steve applied a contrarian lens to human history, revealing that life on the whole is getting better. Now he's applying that same contrarian lens to our social interactions, revealing the invisible operating system that makes human coordination possible. I'm looking forward to interviewing Steve about it on this show in a few weeks. Today, we're giving you a sneak peek. After the break, you'll hear a summary of the 5 key insights from When Everyone Knows That Everyone Knows that Steven Pinker wrote and recorded exclusively for us. After that, we'll revisit my 2021 conversation with Steve about his last book, Rationality, a book that dared to argue that our collective ability to think critically, to marshal logic, and relentlessly pursue objective truth is not only the secret to our success as a species, but also the wellspring of progress. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Does it ever feel like you're a marketing professional just speaking into the void? But with LinkedIn ads, you can know you're reaching the right decision makers, a network of 130 million of them, in fact. You can even target buyers by job title, industry, company, seniority, skills, and did I say job title? See how you can avoid the void and reach the right buyers with LinkedIn ads. Spend $250 on your first campaign and get a free $250 credit for the next one. Get started at linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply.
The Hilton sale is on. Now through September 29th, you can save up to 20% on stays this fall and beyond. Long weekends, last-minute getaways, holiday gatherings. There's a Hilton stay for all of them. More moments, more experiences, more destinations. Now 20% off for a limited time because it matters where you stay. Don't wait. Book by September 29th and save up to 20% at Hilton.com. Terms apply. Hilton for the stay.
My name is Steve Pinker. I'm a cognitive scientist and a professor of psychology at Harvard. I've spent my life thinking about how people think, so it's natural that my latest book is about how people think about what other people think they think. Let me tell you why this is so important in understanding politics, money, and everyday life. A first insight. When the little boy said the emperor was naked, he wasn't telling anyone anything they didn't already know. But he added to their knowledge nonetheless. By blurting out what every onlooker could see within earshot of the others, he ensured that they now knew that everyone else knew what they knew, and everyone knew that, and so on. And that changed their relationship with the editor from obsequious deference to ridicule and scorn. Hans Christian Andersen's immortal story draws on a momentous logical distinction. With private knowledge, I know something and you know it. With common knowledge, I know that fact and you know it, but in addition, I know that you know it, and you know that I know it. On top of that, I know that you know that I know it, and you know that I know that you know it, and so on ad infinitum. This matters because common knowledge is necessary for coordination. In a classic example from Thomas Schelling, a couple gets separated in New York, incommunicado, and somehow have to find each other. He knows that she likes to hang out in a bookstore, so he heads there, but then realizes that she will predict that he will go to a camera store, so he changes course and heads there. Until he realizes that she will anticipate that he will guess that she will opt for the bookstore, so he does another about-face, only for it to dawn on him that it will occur to her that he knows she is aware that he likes to haunt the camera store, so he pirouettes once again. Meanwhile, she is whipsawed by the same futile empathy. Nothing short of common knowledge can guarantee they'll end up at the same place at the same time. A second insight. Of course, people can't literally think an infinite chain of I know that she knows thoughts, what cognitive psychologists call recursive mentalizing. Our heads start to spin with 3 or 4 layers, let alone an infinite number. In a well-known episode of Friends, Phoebe says,
"They don't know that we know they know we know." And Joey, you can't say anything.
And Joey replies, I couldn't even if I wanted to. Instead, common knowledge can be captured in a simple mental state, the intuition that something is self-evident or public or out there. That can be conveyed through direct speech, in their case, a cell phone call. Indeed, solving coordination dilemmas is probably the reason our species evolved language in the first place. The next best thing to a public event is a focal point, or common salience. Schelling suggests that the separated couple might go to the big clock at Grand Central Station, even if it wasn't close to where they'd been separated, simply because each knew it was likely to pop out in the mind of the other. A third solution is a convention, a tacit agreement among people to do things in a certain way for no other reason than that they agree to do it that way, which is reason enough. The couple might agree that if they're ever separated again, they'll adopt the convention of chivalry and meet at the bookstore, or patriarchy and meet at the camera store, or whimsy and meet at a department store lost and found, or fairness and flip a coin or take turns. A third insight. On larger scales, focal points and conventions drive our financial and legal coordination. An obvious example is driving on the right. Or left, it doesn't matter as long as everyone agrees on the same side. As in the joke where a woman calls her husband during his commute and says, "Be careful, honey, they say on the radio there's a maniac driving on the wrong side of the freeway." He replies, "One maniac? There are hundreds of them." Another obvious example is currency, where I accept a piece of paper in exchange for an old couch because I know my grocer will accept it in exchange for some food, because he knows that his suppliers will accept it, and so on. Not all the examples are obvious. Why are autocrats terrified of public protests? The basic reason was explained by Gandhi in the eponymous movie.
100,000 Englishmen simply cannot control 350 million Indians if those Indians refuse to cooperate.
But although citizens can refuse to cooperate if each one fears that no one else will join him. In a public demonstration, each protester can not only see the others, but see the others are seeing the others. This common knowledge can allow them to coordinate their resistance, whether by literally storming the palace or by bringing the state machinery to a halt through work stoppages and boycotts. This is the basis for a joke from the old Soviet Union about a man standing in the Moscow train station handing out leaflets to passers-by. Soon enough, the KGB arrest him, only to discover that the leaflets are blank sheets of paper. "What is the meaning of this?" they demand. The man replies, "What's there to write? It's so obvious." The point of the joke is that the man was generating subversive common knowledge. And in a case of life imitating a joke, in 2022, Russian police arrested a woman for, yes, holding a blank sign. Another unobvious example is from finance. John Maynard Keynes compared professional investment to a newspaper beauty contest in which the goal is not to choose the prettiest face, as in the old Miss Rheingold beer ads, but the face that is chosen by the most other competitors, each of whom is anticipating the choices of the other competitors, anticipating the same thing. So speculative investors buy securities not because of their productive value, but because they hope they can unload them on other investors, greater fools, and so on. This means that exuberant cycles of recursive mentalizing can be set off by a conspicuous focal point, like a Super Bowl ad. Everyone knows that everyone watches the Super Bowl, and everyone knows that. In 2022, cryptocurrency exchanges ran high-concept ads that tried to gin up a common expectation of rising prices, not by touting any advantages of crypto, but by warning, "Don't be like Larry, don't miss out." Of course, it's only so long that an asset can levitate in midair, suspended by nothing but common expectation. Bubbles pop when a market starts running out of the greater fools who don't want to miss out on the next big thing, or when a reason for doubt itself becomes common knowledge. That can send investors running for the exits, each desperate to sell the asset out of fear that still others are selling it. The result can be a bank run, a hyperinflation, or a depression. When Franklin Delano Roosevelt said, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself," it was not a feel-good bromide, but a theorem of common knowledge. With investors always on the lookout for focal points, economic leaders must be careful wordsmiths. Alan Greenspan once said, "Since I've become a central banker, I've learned to mumble with great incoherence. If I seem unduly clear to you, you must have misunderstood what I said." When Jimmy Carter's inflation czar, Alfred Kahn, was told by his boss never to use the self-fulfilling word depression, he said, "We're in danger of having the worst banana in 45 years. A fourth insight. My own interest in common knowledge comes from its role in everyday life. Social relationships are coordination games. Two people are friends, or lovers, or allies, or dominant and subordinate, or transactional partners because each knows that the other knows they are. These understandings are cemented by a number of common knowledge generators, like eye contact, where you're looking at the part of the person who's looking at the part of you that's looking at that part of them, or blushing, where you feel the heat of your face reddening from the inside, knowing your onlookers are seeing it from the outside, or laughter, where a conspicuous noise exposes the common assumptions held by everyone who gets the joke. Conversely, when we don't want to upend a relationship, we take steps to avoid the common knowledge that would threaten it. We avoid looking someone in the eye, or ignore the elephant in the room, or mumble with great incoherence. This explains why people often don't blurt out what they mean in so many words, but veil their intentions in euphemism and innuendo. There's the classic sexual "come on, would you like to come up and see my etchings?" which by the 1930s was familiar enough that James Thurber drew a cartoon in which a hapless man says to his date, "You wait here and I'll bring the etchings down." Nowadays, etchings has become Netflix and chill. People also veil their bribes, as in, "Gee, officer, is there some way we can settle the ticket here?" And their threats, as in, "Nice story you got there. Real shame if something happened to it." The point of an innuendo is not exactly to provide plausible deniability. These euphemisms don't pass the giggle test, but that they provide plausible deniability of common knowledge. If Harry says, "Want to come up for Netflix and chill?" and Sally says no, then Sally knows she's turned down an overture, and Harry knows she's turned down an overture. But does Sally know that Harry knows? She could think, maybe Harry thinks I'm naive. And does Harry know that Sally knows that he knows? He could think, maybe Sally thinks I'm dense. With no common knowledge, they can maintain the fiction of a platonic friendship. But if Harry had said, "Would you like to come up and have sex?" then Harry knows that Sally knows that Harry knows that Sally knows, and they cannot maintain the fiction of a friendship. That's what lies behind the feeling that with blurted out speech, you can't take it back. It's out there. A fifth insight. The logic of coordination and common knowledge explains why we deplore all the hypocrisy and white lies and role-playing and rituals of social relationships, but in reality would not want to live without them. As dystopian comedies like Liar, Liar play out, our relationships are cemented by commonly accepted creeds of unstinting loyalty, generosity, and fidelity. Privately, we know they're fictions, but making them common knowledge would pollute the pool of assumptions that allow us to get along. In sum, many seemingly arbitrary conventions in political, economic, and social life may be solutions to coordination games that depend on common knowledge. And many of our rituals and hypocrisies are driven by the need to avoid it. I'll leave it to you to ponder how this may explain other puzzles like social media shaming mobs, Kardashian celebrity, where someone is famous for being famous, strategic ambiguity in international relations, the difference between CC and BCC in email etiquette, and the classic definition of a gaffe in Washington, when a politician says something that is true.
Coming up, my conversation with Steve about rationality. But first, a word from our sponsors.
Wish you could become a morning person? You know the type, up before the sun, early morning runs, first one to the office with donuts and a smile. How do they do it? Easy. With the new Galaxy Watch 8, sleep tracking and personalized insights from Samsung Health help you improve so you can wake up to a whole new you. One who, dare I say it, skips the snooze? It's possible. Train your sleep with Galaxy Watch 8. Learn more at Samsung.com. Requires compatible Samsung Galaxy phone, Samsung Health app, and Samsung account.
This episode is brought to you by Nespresso and Samra Origins by the Weekend Coffee Collection.
Introducing Samra Origins. My collaboration with Nespresso is a connection to my roots, to my mother, Samra. Coffee that hits the right notes. It transports you. Crafted with unique notes and bold, soaring flavors. Experience a taste that moves you. Nespresso and Samra Origins.
Discover more at Nespresso.com.
Welcome back to the show. When I sat down with Steven Pinker all the way back in September 2021, I pointed out that his best-known books, The Better Angels of Our Nature and Enlightenment Now, do something reckless. They take an optimistic view of historical trends and the trajectory of our species. So I had to ask, does he consider himself to be an optimist?
I would say no, and I resist the characterization of Better Angels and Enlightenment Now as optimistic books. I mean, in a sense they are, but their point isn't that we should see the glass as half full or wear rose-colored glasses. It's that we should be aware of data that most people are ignorant of. So has violence increased or decreased? Well, don't consult your intuitions. Don't consult your memory of what you read in the paper this morning. Let's look at people who've counted bodies over the years, whether it's from wars or homicides or whatever other category of violence you're interested in, and just see whether the lines went up or down.
Obviously, those books performed extremely well and were well received by huge audiences. But I was really surprised by how much negative response they got from the left. And I wonder whether reading your new book, Rationality, to what extent perhaps those critics will be able to benefit from this new book in more rationally evaluating the prior books. Was that on your mind at all?
I wrote the book for its own reasons. It is, I think there is a consistent, philosophy of the human condition, you might put it, across the four books that we've talked about, which is there is such a thing as human nature. It includes some rather nasty qualities like dominance and revenge. It has some irrational qualities, and such as the classic illusions and biases and fallacies that cognitive psychologists and behavioral economists have documented over the decades. On the other hand, one part of human nature is an open-ended, combinatorial, creative capacity to come up with new ideas and to share them with language. And over the centuries, we have put our brains to the problem of reducing human scourges like disease, like hunger, like oppression, like violence. We've come up now and again with innovations, inventions, institutions, norms, laws, customs that reduce the nastier parts of the human condition. And if we remember the ones that work and try not to repeat our mistakes, then gradually and unevenly we can make progress. So it's progressive in the sense that it allows for the possibility of progress and advocates it, calls for examining the status quo and trying to do better. It cautions against any kind of utopian thinking because we are imperfect beings. None of us is infallible or omniscient. That's one of the reasons that among the principles of rationality are free speech, open inquiry, the ability to voice ideas and to criticize ideas. But you can believe in human nature and be a progressive too, which I am. Now, I joke that in Enlightenment Now that progressives hate progress.
That is. And
Right.
you mentioned that just pointing to data saying we live longer, fewer people are poor, there are fewer famines, there's less war, outrages people, especially,
Yeah.
well, on the left and the right for different reasons. And some of the reaction to the book is, how dare he say that progressives hate progress, and how dare he say that there's been progress?
That's extraordinary. Yeah, I mean, it strikes me that response comes in part from a tactical analysis, whether it's conscious or unconscious, among many liberals, that proclaiming that the apocalypse is coming is more effective in motivating people to engage in positive change than pointing out where we've made progress, and that if we continue to do the things that are generating progress, that we will be much better off. Of course, there's a separate analysis, which is what is the reality.
Indeed. And of course, foremost, we've got to know what the reality is. But yes, if you tell people we're doomed, then I don't think that's the best prompt for effective constructive action, because the two rational responses to the announcement that we're doomed are, well, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. Why try to make the world a better place if people will just screw it up no matter what you do, and we're doomed anyway, so let's just enjoy ourselves. Or everything is rotten, let's just burn everything down to enjoy the flames. Now, I think both of those are pernicious. The first one would be apathy and cynicism. The second one would be a kind of destructive radicalism, which ignores the fact that things can be much worse than they are now. And history tells us that. You can have cholera, you can have rampaging gangs and militias in the streets committing rape and arson and looting. It's bottomless how low a society can go. We are very far from that bottom. We are not where we ought to be along many dimensions. But it's looking at things that have worked. Haven't brought us perfection, and nothing will, and it's probably dangerous to try. But it suggests that a lot of the things that kind of good old-fashioned liberals were in favor of, like science, like certain government policies, if they're well thought out, if they're evaluated to see if they work, can actually make things better. If you do take a more evidence-driven approach, and you say, well, hey, Medicaid and Medicare really have reduced the rates of untreated illness among the elderly and the poor. Social Security has decimated poverty among the elderly. The Earned Income Tax Credit has protected people against the ravages of inequality and made up for some wage stagnation. You can say, well, let's redouble our efforts. Let's figure out what the policies are that we should keep, maybe even better ones that we can have in the future, because they do work. Not perfectly, but much better than nothing.
Getting to the subject at hand of your latest book, Rationality, what it is, why it seems scarce, and why it matters. For starters, a really elementary question: how do you define rationality?
I define it as the use of knowledge to attain a goal, where knowledge means justified true belief.
In your own life, are there areas where you behave irrationally?
Sure. I take some risks that I probably can't justify. Bicycling, and I probably jaywalk occasionally, where the benefit of getting across the street a few seconds earlier couldn't possibly justify the risk of the probability of getting killed multiplied by the value I place on my own life. I probably don't review my investments often enough to see if my retirement fund is wisely allocated. Now, granted, I do talk about in the book a concept of bounded rationality. Namely, if I took out a day a week to study my investment portfolio, I'd probably be a little more comfortable when I retire, but I'd be throwing away a seventh of my life before I retire. So that is the concept of bounded rationality from the economist and cognitive scientist Herbert Simon, is that computation, reasoning, rationality have costs. You got to gather the information. You've got to allocate the attention, and so you can never be perfectly rational.
When it comes to the bicycling, Steve, I've made the case to my wife, and I've not succeeded in convincing her of this. If I am in my life to engage in any kind of higher risk activities like riding a motorcycle or skiing, that it'd be more rational to do that towards the end of my life, because the opportunity cost of possibly dying is smaller, because I'll have fewer years remaining to live.
Well, you have identified a paradox in the psychology of risk-taking, which is that your logic is impeccable, and it predicts that it's the people in their 70s who should be, reckless risk-takers, who should be surfing on railroad cars and dangling under underpasses to spray graffiti on the arch, whereas teenagers who have their entire lives ahead of them should be ultra cautious. Now, it doesn't work that way. It's just an interesting puzzle in human evolutionary psychology.
It's easy to be discouraged right now about the human capacity for rationality, looking around. But you make the case that we have the capacity for pretty extraordinary rational thinking. You begin the book with a description of the San of the Kalahari Desert, and their lifestyle provides some insights into how our hunter-gatherer ancestors lived. And I love this passage. You write that the San reasoned their way from fragmentary data to remote conclusions with an intuitive grasp of logic, critical thinking, statistical reasoning, correlation and causation, and game theory. Could you share some examples of how the San do this?
Yeah, and I wanted to counter the tendency to blame human irrationality on our hunter-gatherer ancestors. That is, well, they're always poised to flinch at the rustle of a predator in the grass, and so that explains why we jump the gun and reason from our gut and the seat of our pants. But no, they're hunter-gatherers are highly cerebral. They have to be because they're slower than other animals and less fierce. But the San will figure out from some tracks what the species was, how tired it was. It's often its age, from how eroded the hoof must have been that left a track. This makes a big difference because the way they hunt is they pursue an animal until it keels over from exhaustion. We humans do have one advantage over furry mammals, and that is we're naked and we sweat. So we can jog and run and do kind of marathons. We're not faster than an antelope, but we actually last longer. The antelope will keel over from heat stroke. However, the antelope will, dart over the horizon and then be gone, and all that it leaves behind is tracks. And so to relentlessly pursue the antelope until it collapses, you really got to know, well, first of all, whether there's any hope, whether it's such a swift species and in such good shape that you may as well give up, or whether it's starting to flag, whether the spaces between the hoof prints show that it's starting to tire out, if it's kicking up sand, a lot of inferences like that. And they debate them, and a young upstart can contradict his elder, and kinds of reasoning that we kind of take for granted, but it goes back, as best we can tell, to as long as we've been human, and their capacities that are sitting inside all of us.
Well, and meanwhile, the San might look at us today and say, 55% of Americans believe in psychic healing, 41% in ESP, 37% believe in haunted houses, 32% believe in ghosts. And you point out that, this is all from your book, you point out that some people believe in houses haunted by ghosts without believing in ghosts.
Right. Which is an example of the famous conjunction fallacy, that people can believe that A and B is more probable than A alone, even though that's mathematically impossible.
What's happening?
What sometimes happens is that because a lot of mainstream media are squirrely when it comes to paranormal phenomena, so you can watch the History Channel and they'll give credulous coverage of ancient astronauts, or recently the New Yorker magazine had a credulous article about UFOs. The New York Times has sometimes given sympathetic portraits to astrologers and self-described psychics. So the hard-headed view that our best science rules some things out, like ESP, is actually not something that people are really exposed to that much.
Yeah.
And given that we all have certain intuitions, like minds can exist separately from bodies, that's kind of how we interact with people. We don't interact with them, most of the time, most of us as hunks of flesh, but rather we have conversations with mind to mind. That's what you and I are doing right now. Then it's kind of a short step to think that minds can part company from bodies in an afterlife, in reincarnation, in ghosts and spirits. And if you don't have the most consistent, hard-headed scientists saying, look, we've checked, we know the laws of physics pretty well, this can't happen, then it's easy to think, well, that there are various exceptions to that rule, and that paranormal phenomena are plausible.
This is one of the things that I love about the book. which is that it's not disdainful of our failures to be rational. And I think this is important because disdain, this act of kind of looking down at other people, is one of the sins that I think liberal intellectuals tend to be guilty of, And I think the spirit of generosity and patience in understanding how it is that we arrive at these kind of irrational conclusions is inspiring and helpful. Because I find myself getting frustrated at, say, how common it is among friends of mine for folks to talk casually about astrology. This sort of idea that somehow every 30 days, the personalities of babies just immediately change all the time.
Yes.
It just strikes me as so categorically irrational. And there's a part of me that feels like, God, folks, on the one hand, it's cute and it's fun and it's a way of connecting. On the other hand, it's a slippery slope, and we really need to we really need to help each other think critically, right? And so I find myself getting frustrated, but I think that it's very helpful to walk through why it is that we've landed on this tendency to think in these irrational ways. I thought it could be fun to share with our listeners some of the great rational problems that you present in the book. Here's one of them. Linda is 31 years old, single, outspoken, and very bright. She majored in philosophy. As a student, she was deeply concerned with issues of discrimination and social justice, and also participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. Please indicate the probability of each of these statements. Linda's a teacher in elementary school. Linda is active in the feminist movement. Linda's a psychiatric social worker. Linda is a bank teller. Linda is a bank teller and is active in the feminist movement. So the surprise in the results is that more respondents guessed that Linda was a feminist bank teller than guessed that she was a bank teller.
Yes, this is the famous Linda problem, an illustration of the conjunction fallacy that goes back to a work by Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman. And the irrationality, of course, is one that we alluded to earlier in the conversation, namely the probability of A and B can never be higher than the probability of A alone. It's like saying that you're likelier to draw a red queen from a deck than a red card. They just can't be true. But what happens is that people, Tversky and Kahneman's explanation is that people pretty much reason by stereotype. And since that description fits the joint category feminist bank teller better than the category bank teller. And since Linda is a social justice warrior, then the category feminist bank teller kind of fits her to a T. Now, by the way, this is, Linda's kind of a baby boomer name. I don't have any students named Linda. It's been a long time since there have been anti-nuclear demonstrations. And there's been a kind of a cloud of suspicion over a lot of classic psychology findings as to whether they replicate. Mm-hmm. But I can affirm this is highly replicable. And if it's instead of Linda, it's Amanda, and instead of it's anti-nuclear, it's Black Lives Matter, the effect works just fine. In fact, it's very hard to make it go away, even if you do obvious things, like instead of saying, what's the probability that Linda is a feminist bank teller, you say, imagine 1,000 women just like Linda. How many of them are bank tellers? How many of them are feminist bank tellers? Well, now since now it's kind of a question of kind of a real arithmetic, far fewer people get it wrong. But a lot of people still do. So it's a robust effect. And you see it actually in a lot of human conversation and discourse and deliberation. For example, it is a built-in fallacy in a lot of pundits and prognosticators. If I were to say, what are the chances that that World War III will break out in the next 10 years? And I say, well, what is the chances that China will invade Taiwan, prompting an American response and escalating into World War III? A lot of people give a higher probability to the latter, just because it's so much more imaginable than the greater category of World War III breaking out for any reason, including that one, which has got to be higher. But since we don't have a scenario in our imagination that we can play out, then that which we can't imagine, we assume to be improbable.
Right. People are selecting the more vivid story. Right. We are storytelling animals, and we like hearing stories, and greater detail suggests to us that it's more believable. And navigating statistical predictions is such a critical part of our lives, yet most of us don't really understand how probability actually works. And I think neglecting base rates seems to be one of the most consistent sins that we're guilty of.
This is another conclusion that was identified by Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman, that and it's behind the conjunction fallacy in the Linda problem. Namely, we go with the description rather than the base rate, and it affects medical diagnosis. If you've got a positive test result for a not so common disease, and it's not a perfect test, so there's a certain percentage of false positives. Well, when you think about it, if it's unlikely you have the disease in the first place, and the test does give a few false positives, that if you've got a positive result, it doesn't mean you have the disease. It might be 50-50. It may be that, or less. And in fact, a lot of doctors get it wrong. If the prevalence of a disease in a population is, say, 1 in 1,000, if the false alarm rate for a test is, say, 10%, then if the true positive rate is 90%, then if you have a positive result, chances are you don't have the disease. And actually, a lot of physicians, let alone their patients, make that error. In the case of forecasting, the error is to overweight highly imaginable scenarios, even though every extra detail that you add to a scenario should make it less probable, because the same outcome could come about for all kinds of other reasons. But the better the dramaturgical setup, the more vivid the narrative, the more compelling the story, the more probable we think it is.
One very practical area where we're not very rational is in assessing risk. And it seems like part of this is that we don't make the effort to collect good data. Like, for instance, you point out, I found this statistic kind of remarkable. I mean, so many of us are more afraid of flying than driving. Flying, there are only 250 deaths per year, if I remember correctly. And yet there are more than 1 million deaths per year from driving globally. And I think this ends up relating to media coverage and the availability heuristic and the kind of fears that we're presented with by the media.
Absolutely. And as much as I respect the mainstream media for editing and fact-checking and developing a reputation for accuracy, there's a built-in way in which the media misinform people, and that is they serve up events, and especially big, newsworthy, photogenic events, that because life often happens in the things that don't take place, the cities that aren't attacked by terrorists, the neighborhoods that are not deteriorating, and those don't get covered, whereas things that go viral, that are captured on cell phone cameras, that have big orange explosions, those get printed above the fold. A reminder for listeners that that's an allusion to these things called newspapers, hard copies of news sites. And as a result, the news systematically misinforms people, not because of any malfeasance or being the enemy of the people, but that's just kind of built into the nature of news. And I do think that the news section of news sources should take a leaf out of the page of the sports section and the business section, and which publish statistics every day, and people read them. Mm-hmm. And you don't just, in the business section, you find out the price of commodities and currencies and stocks and bonds, whether they go up, down, or don't change. Whereas on the front page, you only see carbon emissions or the crime rate or war deaths when something happens. Whereas there should be more kind of either dashboards where you can track an indicator, or at least a story about an event could put it into statistical context and say, there has been this school shooting, but it accounts for a fraction of 1% of all murder victims.
Absolutely. No, I love that suggestion, and people do seem to like data. When you look at we consume a lot of data about the weather, about, as you say, the stock market, about sports teams, and it does seem like better presentation of data could make an enormous difference. And when you talk about the problem with exaggerated senses of danger based on media representations, this can have minor effects, like we don't want to swim in the ocean because we're afraid of getting bitten by a shark, which is highly unlikely. But also, as you point out, much more concerning and damaging long-term implications, such as the fear of nuclear power, right? I think you point out that the media frenzy over 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl kind of had a profound impact on stalling the spread of nuclear power around the world, which in the long run may have seriously contributed to our environmental problems.
Yeah, someone that I know said he blames climate change on the Doobie Brothers and Bruce Springsteen for their 1979 benefit concert, No Nukes, which, following 3 Mile Island, tried to terrify people about the danger of a meltdown, whereas more people are killed in a week from pollution from the burning of coal than have died in all of the nuclear accidents since the dawn of nuclear power. But because people dying of emphysema and asthma and pulmonary diseases just never make the papers, but the people who died in Chernobyl do, we can have a warped sense of what's likely to kill us with terrible effects on our policies.
When we think about risks in different areas of our lives, one observation I would make is that it seems to me that people are not very good at distinguishing between different types of risks in different parts of our lives. So we have risks to our health, from eating bad food or riding bicycles through cities, risks to our finances, whether it's gambling or investing in the stock market. And then there are these reputational risks, right? Like public speaking or starting a new business. Personally, as a serial entrepreneur, I've currently building company number 4. It seems to me that people might actually have an exaggerated idea of the risk of starting a new business. I recently pulled some data, and according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, about 20% of U.S. small businesses fail within the first year. By the end of year 5, roughly 50% fail. After 10 years, a third have survived. So that's, not great odds. But on the other hand, if you start a series of businesses over the course of decades, one will probably succeed, and we also know that people are happier when they work for themselves because they have more autonomy, they build things they believe in. Because the downside of a business failing is not like the downside of risks riding a bicycle or skiing through trees. Our fears are consistent in all realms of life, but I think that it may not be obvious to people that some risks are more serious than others.
Well, indeed, and this falls into the area of expected utility or rational choice, and I have a chapter on that. If we're so risk averse that no one ever starts a business, then we'd be much worse off, even though a lot of businesses fail. But the thing is that the ones that succeed multiply, or the probability of success multiplied by the amount of good it does us, that we want to encourage that kind of risk taking because the overall payoffs are hugely positive. And that's why we have, on the one hand, and this took, of course, centuries to develop, but we have things like the bankruptcy laws that allow you, mean that you don't become a pauper if you start a business and it fails. We've eliminated debtors' prisons so that people can take chances but don't have to worry about giving up their freedom. And of course, part of the whole business ethos is it's okay to fail. I'm proud of my failures as well as my successes. Dare to try it out. You also have to change the social stigma. And if it were to deter too many people from taking chances, then we'd all be worse off. If you multiply out the chance of success by the net social benefit. Now, someone could say, critics of entrepreneurial culture or capitalism could say, well, that whole the whole effect on society has been negative. We'd be better off if we didn't have anyone starting businesses, but the government controlled the whole economy. But we do have some data on how well that works out, such as in the Soviet Union and Maoist China, North Korea, and we also have data on the fact that since the birth of modern capitalism, maybe 250 years ago, poverty has plunged and prosperity has soared, as have a lot of other good things, such as longevity and education and women's rights and minority rights and so on. So yes, you want a culture and you want a legal system that incentivizes reasonable risk-taking despite the inevitability of failure.
And thinking of other examples of just very practical ways in which rational thinking can help people in their lives. One that really struck me in the early pages of your book was the difficulty that people have understanding exponential growth, the exponential nature of compounding returns. And you give this great kind of thought experiment of asking people, what happens when someone invests $400 per month for 40 years with a 10% annual return? And when people are asked to guess how much money is produced at the end of this, the guesses are much lower than the actual number, which I'm sure you remember, I believe is $2.5 million, right? $400 a month invested over the course of 40 years with a 10% annual return. The power of compounding returns is something that I think a lot of people have trouble fully grokking.
I mean, the simplest example comes from a 3-item test in cognitive reflectiveness developed by Shane Frederick. And it is, imagine that the lily pads on a pond double every day. At the end of 30 days, the pond is completely covered. On what day is it half covered? The answer is the 29th day. That it's because if it doubles every day, then working backwards from when it's completely covered, then it's half covered the day before. People tend to guess something more like halfway through the month or a little bit more than halfway. And the blast off of exponential growth tends not to occur to us. And so people underinvest in retirement. The earlier you begin, the better. People tend to take on too much credit card debt, because it can compound. That as you pay interest on the interest you haven't paid, you can lose any amount of money. People underestimated the danger of COVID in the early days of the pandemic, including some experts who said, "Oh well, it's no worse than strep throat." But if every infected person could not only infect others but turn them into infectors, that's the ingredient for exponential growth, and we really can't keep track of it in our minds. It's interesting, why not? Because anything that reproduces leads to exponential growth, and we're in an ecosystem of living things. Probably the reason is that exponential growth in natural environments can't go on for very long. Anything that grows exponentially or starts to grow exponentially will foul its environment or consume all of its resources and stop growing exponentially. So we don't actually see a whole lot of exponential growth in a natural environment, except in artificial institutions like banking and finance, where there's no limit to the amount of money you could owe or earn.
So we all have irrational tendencies that can affect us in trivial personal ways. But what happens when our irrationality is more potent than that? What happens when a failure to think clearly seeps out into society? Steve shares his answer after the break.
When your investors, customers, and workers demand more from your business, make it happen with SAP. The AI-powered capabilities of SAP can help you streamline costs, connect with new suppliers, and manage payroll, even when your business is being pulled in different directions. To deliver a quality product at a fair price, while paying your people what they're worth too, so your business can stay unfazed. Learn more at sap.com/uncertainty.
If you thought goldenly breaded McDonald's chicken couldn't get more golden, think Golder, because new sweet and smoky special edition gold sauce is here. Made for your chicken favorites at participating McDonald's for a limited time.
Chapter 10, which you introduced, I think your first sentence is, "This is the chapter you've been waiting for." Yes. It will be a crowd pleaser. It's just fascinating. And you clearly spent a lot of time thinking about why it is that we have these kind of irrational tendencies. And you come up with a theory that I think is original to you. It sounded like a new idea, that people fundamentally live in two realms, right? They live in a literal realm in which we all live every day. We pick up our kids from school, we navigate the world, and we're pretty rational navigating this literal realm. And then we also inhabit a mythological realm, that there's a place where we can have somewhat fantastical beliefs in a kind of shared realm with other people that's beyond our comprehension. And this is something that as humans, we've been doing for a very long time, right? Because, we've had, whether that was Greeks believing in all the many gods or what have you. And that this mythological realm, I think, if I'm understanding you correctly, is more about social cohesion and shared identity than it is a sober attempt to apprehend reality. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give some credit to some predecessors, the social psychologist Robert Abelson, the cognitive anthropologist Dan Sperber, who had versions of this idea. But it helps resolve the paradox that a rational species can be capable of entertaining so much malarkey. When it comes to, and the fact that the people who believe in stark raving mad conspiracy theories like QAnon a lot of them, do hold a job. They fill out their taxes. They repair their cars. So it's not that they are absolutely deluded, hallucinating in their everyday lives. But it's okay to be deluded and to hallucinate in certain realms where, traditionally we couldn't find out. Even for most of us today, it doesn't really matter what we believe unless we're movers and shakers and influencers. No one really cares about your opinions of the origins of COVID, or what is the cause of jet contrails in the sky. Is it condensing water vapor, or are these mind-altering drugs secretly dispensed by a government program? I mean, who cares what you believe? So you may as well believe in a good story, something that confirms your worst suspicions about your enemies, that might rally the people in your own sect or your own tribe together. Now, some of us have the belief that, or the meta belief, that all of our beliefs should be grounded in evidence and reason. If you can't find out the truth, you should say we don't know the truth, but that you shouldn't just weave entertaining or empowering stories. But that is It is a recent and weird and historically unusual conviction that all of our beliefs should be held in terms of whether they are true or false. A lot of people, probably most people, at least in some realms, don't care. And you even see that in things like historical fiction, like the events depicted in the Crown about the British royal family. Some historians say, hey, wait a second, they couldn't possibly know whether those dialogues took place. And some of them we know didn't take place. And the writers of the show say, well, true, false, it's a good story. It could have happened. Why are you getting so anal, so persnickety? So you can see that response even in highly educated, literate people. You see it in the reaction to the so-called new atheists like Richard Dawkins and Dan Dennett and Sam Harris. They were viciously attacked, not by people who say, look, here's all the evidence that God does exist, but rather, this isn't the kind of question that you should be debating whether it's true or false in the first place. It gives people spiritual succor. It brings people together. It leads to social action. It sands the rough edges off of life. Why are you being so literal-minded and asking whether God exists or not?
Fascinating. Well, and as you point out, religion was once arguably in the literal realm, that if you believe as a Christian that anyone who doesn't convert to Christianity will burn in hell for eternity, which is a very long time, you would be doing people, if you really believe that, right, on a literal level, you would be doing people a service to hold them at sword point and force them to convert to Christianity, which people did.
Yeah, you'd be doing the biggest favor of their lives. Yeah.
It's the least you could do.
You got to give them credit for acting on their having the courage of their convictions. Yeah.
But you point out that religion has, obviously many people are passionate believers, but it's moved away from this literal interpretation. You don't see people, converting people at sword point at the same levels. But I'm reminded of the argument. I'm trying to think of where I first encountered this. Maybe it was Zero to Some by Robert Wright. That groups of people who collaborate more effectively have outcompeted groups of people who are less effective at collaborating for all of human history. That this is sort of part of the arc of human history, and that an advantage that religious belief gave groups of people was belief in a common cause that enabled them to organize and potentially form armies or become very successful as a culture because they had this collective belief in a higher power. And to some degree, this, I don't know if I'm stretching this too far here, but this sense that we like having shared mythological beliefs in higher powers, and we may be attracted to that. In a weird way, we have 25% of Americans believe in QAnon, right? Which is this just totally preposterous notion that, the government, media, and finance are controlled by a group of Satan-worshiping pedophiles who run a global child sex trafficking operation.
You forgot the cannibalism.
Right. No. I mean, it's just utterly preposterous.
It's sparking mad, and but again, it becomes a little more comprehensible when you say, well, what do you mean by believe? Right. That is, are all these people kind of calling the police? Most of them, it's like, yeah, well, maybe it's true. It's kind of interesting to think that it's true. It could very well be true. I wouldn't put it past them to do those things. Why are you being such a, so little-minded in forcing me to show whether it's true or not? It's just not the way that people think about beliefs in that realm.
Well, it's for me anyway, this distinction that you make between sort of truth realm and mythology realm was very helpful in trying to understand, how it is that people arrive at these views. And as you pointed out, like if you really have millions and millions and millions of Americans who believed that there's a pizzeria in Washington, D.C., where there's a child sex trafficking operation in the basement, that there ended up being one-star review making reference to lewd glances at children, and then one guy who came in with a gun to try to investigate the basement. But if this is out of countless millions of people who actually literally believe this was happening, why was it so few people who actually took an action? And your argument would be, well, this was more of a loosely held mythological realm conviction.
Exactly. I mean, if you really thought children were being raped in the basement, then you should call the police, and no one called the police. I mean, there was that one guy who the Comet Ping Pong Avenger, I think of him, who burst in with his guns blazing. Fortunately, he didn't hurt anyone, and he was repentant afterwards. But he took it literally, and most people don't. It's like, well, I wouldn't put it past them to do something like that. Whether they do or not, who knows? But the thing is that they could, and if you believe that they do, then you'll be on the right side of this divide.
So maybe my friends who are astrology believers enjoy this as a loosely held common mythology and aren't actually hiring their employees based on their birthdays.
You sure hope not, and I suspect that's exactly true. Yeah,
probably right. Yeah. Well, so after this great exercise in understanding all the different reasons why we humans have these irrational tendencies, you end the book with a kind of call to action, and you say, to understand is not to forgive. We can understand why people are irrational without conceding that it's okay. Right? Because these beliefs can have real consequences. False beliefs about vaccines result in people dying. Conspiracy theories incite terrorism, wars, genocide. But then you say the arc of knowledge is a long one and it bends towards rationality, which I was surprised to read that line after everything that had preceded it.
Well, yeah, there are certain customs like human sacrifice, astrology in actual political decision-making, witchcraft and sorcery accusations. There are things that do tend to fall by the wayside, as well as barbaric practices, of course, like slavery, like lynching, like dueling among men of honor, like laughing at the insane as a way of a form of entertainment, public hangings, capital punishment for shoplifting. And these, of course, the topics of my earlier two books, Better Angels of Our Nature and Enlightenment Now. And of course, science itself has been spectacularly advancing. And rationality has been applied to domains of human activity that formerly were just guided by gut feeling and intuition, such as effective altruism in philanthropy. That is, how about allocating your money where it'll do the most good? Moneyball in sports. Does the sacrifice bunt really work? Well, let's go to the data. Evidence-driven policing, which was responsible for at least part of the great American crime decline in the 90s. Evidence-based medicine. And other domains in which we actually are getting more rational. I think there may be an increase in rationality inequality at the top end.
Right,
we're more rational than ever, even though the top may be racing away from the bottom.
Which begs the question, what's the point of refining your own rationality if society at large is increasingly illogical? The answer, Steve says, is that we have to radically update our norms and values. Coming up after the break, he shares his vision for how we might go about doing that.
This episode is sponsored by Friskies, who would like to tell your cats hi. Now, if that didn't get your cat's attention, there is one thing that always does the trick. Just pour some Friskies crunchy food in the bowl and you'll hear those paws come running. Works every time. With so many Friskies choices, you can always bring your cats running from their secret napping spots. There's always more to explore. See for yourself at friskies.com or visit your local store.
So there are really two challenges here. There's the challenge for each of us to become more rational as individuals. And purchasing your book, Rationality, is clearly a great first step for anybody interested in that project. But then the bigger challenge for us collectively is how do we become more rational as a society? And you say we need to valorize the norm of rationality itself, right? That we need to change our norms to celebrate and reward rational thinking. Is that right?
I think that's one ingredient. I think that the three main ingredients, one of them is education, that the tools of rationality, such as probability and critical thinking, should be taught early and reinforced throughout the curriculum. A second is the institutions that promote rationality, such as peer review, fact-checking, freedom of speech, have to be reinforced. And then the third, and this is the hardest to implement because you can't legislate norms from the top down, but it should be just common etiquette that you don't base an argument on an anecdote, or that you don't you take a peek at the arguments from the other side. You don't knock down a straw man when you're criticizing someone else, but you, as they say, steel man it. That is, you come up with the strongest possible version of the argument and you try to refute that. These are the norms of the so-called rationality community, but they shouldn't be the kind of the credo of a club of oddballs. It should be the watchword of all literate and intelligent people.
Yeah, and you say that we should add a fourth R to reading, writing, and arithmetic, rationality. And I heard you say that you'd trade some high school math, such as trigonometry, for classes in probability and Bayesian reasoning. I think my 16-year-old son would be in favor of that.
So they still teach trigonometry in high school?
Yeah, they do. My son is taking it.
Yeah,
now.
I mean, I love trigonometry. I've even used trigonometry in my everyday life every now and again, not that often.
Sure.
But yeah, if there are only so many hours in the day, then absolutely probability theory is more valuable than trigonometry.
And you point out that well-designed courses and video games can help people detect cognitive biases like the gambler's fallacy, sunk cost fallacy, confirmation bias. Do such video games exist today, or are you
they
imagining?
do. Now this would not be, I think they would be scoffed at by serious gamers. But in answer to the question, can people be de-biased? Can people unlearn all these biases that have been documented by Kahneman and Tversky and the behavioral economists? The answer is it's not easy. That simply giving people a lesson, they'll remember the example, but then when they're given a second example that shows the same principle, they won't transfer it. On the other hand, it's the depressing bottom line of almost all education. If you look at how much physics someone remembers 6 months out of college after they've sold their textbook, it's not a pretty sight. But there are ways of teaching anything, including critical thinking, that are more effective than others. There's a psychologist at Boston University, Carrie Morewedge, who has developed these video games and shows that they do have results and they do stick. Now, it may not have to be video games, but it has to be exercises where people are challenged to think through a problem and to spot a fallacy with their own eyes and to work through the correct answer. And it's got to stretch them so that they realize it isn't just about breast cancer diagnosis. It isn't just about the hot hand in basketball. To extract the statistical principle that explains the fallacy, that people have to be encouraged to see it in different guises.
You write towards the end of the book about American universities and the impact of some of the kind of social justice movement on rational thinking and rational administration. What do you think is happening there?
Well, it has been documented, and again, I, above all people, should not point to a few examples as a trend, but the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education has shown that there is an increase in the number of students and professors who've been harassed for expressing unpopular opinions over the last few years. The number of cases has shot up. And it is a real problem. Universities have a lot of perquisites and privileges granted to them by society, like tax-free status, like eye-watering tuition increases. How can they justify their existence? Well, this is the arena in which we try out ideas and see whether they're true or false. And if you can't try out an idea because someone will call you a transphobe or a racist, even if it's a perfectly innocuous but unusual idea, that's going to interfere with the mission of universities to give the societies in which they're embedded a chance to find out what's true and what's false.
One of the many quotes in the book that I love, but that I wrote down, Stephen, for my list of favorite quotes is, each of us has a motive to prefer our truth, but together we're better off with the truth.
Yes, indeed. And it reinforces the idea that and helps resolve the paradox of how our species could be so rationally irrational at the same time. And that is, it's not a question of how rational any single person is. The question is, how good are the institutions in which we collectively pursue rationality despite the biases and fallacies inside each one of us?
On that note, I loved your optimism about the future of social media platforms, because obviously there's been a lot of, I think, valid concern, of course, about what's happened in recent years on social media platforms. But you point out that every new medium, or most anyway, historically have initially been used recklessly, that this was true of books and newspapers in the past. But then over time, institutions emerged to sort of improve the process. And you point out that Wikipedia is an impressive accomplishment because of fact-checking, because there's a fact-checking system, and that these social media platforms, which you describe as, quote, gigantic experiments in anarchy and democracy, are now starting to tune their algorithms to stop rewarding dangerous falsehoods. Do you think that we can fix our social media platforms?
I shouldn't be optimistic. I hope so. I don't know. I don't know whether they will or whether they can. The contrast with a platform like Wikipedia, which I have to confess, when it originated, I thought it was a crackpot idea. Mm-hmm. Anyone could edit an encyclopedia article. Are you nuts? Yeah. And for a variety of reasons, it worked, and Twitter does not. At least when it comes to aligning our beliefs with rationality. Now, it is an open question, and I should not express optimism. We've got to try and wait and see whether there can be ways of steering the Twitterverse, the Facebook universe toward greater truth. Without the problem is that some of the measures have been pretty ham-fisted so far, and accounts are suspended for often perfectly legitimate beliefs, questioning unsettled matters if some algorithm gets triggered by a phrase. So far they haven't done it, and it's really an open challenge whether it's doable.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to land on this wonderful observation you make late in the book, that the core of morality is impartiality. We want what's good for all of us. And impartiality is also the core of reason. And in this sense, you say, rationality is not just a cognitive virtue, but a moral one. A moral system naturally flows from the rational process.
Yeah, it is. That is, it's disinterested in the literal sense of without a vested interest. That is, it's true. An argument is true or false regardless of who makes it. And that principle that you can switch around the people who say things, and it's got to still be true, is very close to the core of morality. In the categorical imperative, act so that the maximum of your act can be a universal law. The golden rule, even what we say to children when we try to teach them the core of morality. How would you like it if he did that to you? That is, turnabout is fair play. And that, of course, that's what rationality consists of as well. It can't be, it's true because I say it, and I'm going to shut you up. It's got to be, here are reasons that I can persuade you of, that you yourself should find as compelling as me. Now, granted, rationality always is in pursuit of some goal. So the use of rationality does not guarantee that it will be deployed toward moral ends. But ultimately, the fact that all of us have a sense of self-preservation, of self-interest, we wouldn't have survived if we didn't. The fact that our well-being depends on how other people treat us. The fact that if I make a demand that you treat me in a certain way, well, I've got to concede that I have to treat you in the same way. Morality comes from that interchangeability of perspectives combined with some nugget of self-interest.
Well, that to me it would be a wonderful foundation for a kind of secular church. In this process of trying to valorize rationality, that getting together to talk about things that matter, the things that we believe in, and reinforcing, shared values of rationality and morality is something that I think benefits from ritual, from music, from celebration, right? I feel like that the marketing side of this mission to spread rationality is something that maybe more can be done with.
Yeah, and I did wonder about that in Enlightenment Now. I mean, and the humanist movement is in part an attempt to do that. There are Sunday morning get-togethers and funerals and weddings with secular poetry and affirmations. But yeah, there is some human need that ought to be satisfied by institutions that are aimed at the norms that we can all agree on.
Well, thank you, Steven Pinker, for taking time out of your reckless bicycling and jaywalking and ignoring your investment portfolio to be with us here today.
Thanks so much for having me. Great conversation.
That was Steven Pinker speaking to me in 2021, right after the publication of his book, Rationality. Holds up pretty well, doesn't it? Steven will be back on the show soon to talk about his new book, When Everyone Knows That Everyone Knows. If there's a question you think I should ask him, send us an email. We're at podcast@nextbigideaclub.com. If you're not following The Next Big Idea on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen, be sure to follow us now so you can get access to all future episodes. We've got some exciting guests and some big announcements coming up in the next few weeks. Today's episode was produced by Caleb Bissinger, sound designed by Mike Toda. I'm Rufus Griscom. More to come.